the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Hey, welcome to Marriage Unhindered. Happy to have you with me. Today, I think we got a great show lined up. We're going to tackle a really tough issue today. We're going to talk about, divorce among Catholics and what that means and the pain of it all, etc. So, are you worried that divorce might be in your future? Are you in the middle of a separation or going through a divorce right now? Or are you divorced and trying to rebuild your life and trying to heal and figure out what comes next? Or do you know anyone in one of those situations? The odds are you do. The odds are we all know people in all three of those situations. So what can we do for those people? Well, this is a show where we focus on fixing what's broken in people's marriages, but we also know that around 40% of Catholic marriages fail too. But that's one of those things we don't talk much about, right? It's kind of this stigma around it. And so, unfortunately, divorced Catholics often feel forgotten and unsupported by their church, by their parish, by their friends, by their Catholic friends, Today, I'm very fortunate to be joined by Carolyn. Carolyn is a certified divorce healing coach and founder of Abounding Joy Ministry. And I think you will be fascinated by what she has to share about her work in helping people in all stages of the divorce journey. Welcome to Marriage Unhindered. I am so happy you're here today.
Hello, Doug. It's great to be with you.
Could you just give us a little bit about your background, your credentials, how you came to do this work?
Well, I'll tell you what, Doug, I'm a child of divorce, and I got married with this great desire to have a happy and holy and lifelong marriage.
Sure.
And we had 3 children and adopted 2 more, such blessings that God gave us. But unfortunately, my husband struggled with some physical, mental, and emotional challenges. And after 30 years, his struggle kind of won out, and he was struggling with gender identity disorder, and he chose to go forward in life, the struggles that he had.
Yeah.
But went through consultations with priests and canon lawyers, went through a divorce and annulment, and I believe God has equipped me for this role as divorce healing coach. For example, going through the divorce, I saw this image of a field with landmines, and the landmines were sin, like greed, selfishness, anger, bitterness, all of those. And I realized there is a serious temptation to sin during this period. And so I went to my husband and I told him about this. And so we agreed to try to help each other not to sin. And so that was something that was forefront in our mind. And so the divorce process, while unavoidable, it was as amicable as possible.
Wow.
And for example, on the day of our divorce, on the way to the courthouse, we drove our own cars, and I asked him if he would stop at the Adoration Chapel with me to have a prayer for the next chapter of each other's lives. And so we did that, and then we went to the courthouse to get divorced. So that's not a typical feeling, but through all that process, the Lord really prompted me to view my husband with compassion and treat him with respect, even though, of course, I had all the human emotions of anger and loss and devastation, and lost most everything that I had in life.
Sure.
And so I was looking at my life. It looked like my whole life was burned down to a pile of ash. And fortunately, God is so good, and he has restored my life and built a new life out of the ash heap. And so he has called me for the last 9 years to minister to others. So I worked with people before, during, and after divorce.
Okay.
And the goal is to achieve the greatest good. So hopefully save a marriage, and there are a few dozen that the Lord has been able to restore through our ministry, reduce the damage to spouses and the children, restore or rebuild their faith, or if they're already divorced, to heal from the damaging effects.
Wow.
People with co-parenting. So there's a lot
There's a lot
there.
I never thought about that, the image you put out there of the landmines, but there is there's a lot of sin that creeps into the whole divorce process because of the anger and the resentment and the bitterness, and so there's this temptation to greed, right? Who can get the most money? And a lot of temptation. The devil has a field day in a divorce on a lot of levels. But I didn't think about all the temptation to other sin just during the divorce process. But man, that's a vivid image, and I hadn't thought of that. Thank you for sharing that. As I was thinking about how to structure our conversation, I was thinking, that there's three distinctive parts, which you just labeled, right? Those whose marriages are kind of heading for divorce, those who are in the process of it, and those who are on the other side of it, trying to rebuild their life out of the ashes, as you say. So how about saving marriages? Because that's what this show is all about. Let's start there, right? Because some marriages can actually be saved in the 11th hour, and you've got some experience doing that.
Well, absolutely. And I would just say, if you're struggling in your marriage, and if you haven't attended Retrovi, or if you haven't sought out marriage counseling with someone experienced like Doug, get busy and do that, because there is much help available for that. Marriage is definitely worth fighting for. The people that come to me are usually the people who may have already been to Retrovi. They may have already been through marriage counseling. They're at the end of what they know to do. And perhaps one of them is not willing to do those things. And so they're kind of stuck. That's where I come in. Kind of the image I have is like they're right at the edge of the cliff, and I'm trying to, hold them and pull them back from the cliff of divorce. But I've seen some really terrible marriages where heroic virtue has overcome the damage in the relationship, and over time there's been restoration. And I also see some difficult marriages where, somebody is suffering, but one person gives up.
Yes.
And as soon as one person gives up, then sometimes the other person says, "There's nothing I can do." Yeah. And I guess I'm here to say there is much that can be done, and I've seen that restoration, and that's, I think, my favorite part, when there's a marriage that's saved.
Oh, there's nothing like it, is there? I mean, yeah, and I certainly, couples I've worked with that, in the first session after I meet with it, I'm like, oh, this couple doesn't have a chance. This thing is, I remember one couple, and when I had the individual session with the wife, she said, listen, all I'm interested in is figuring out how to get divorced and move on with a minimal amount of collateral damage. That's all I want. I'm like, wow, okay. And you know what? They rebuilt it, and they've got a wonderful family. They sent me a Christmas card at Christmas time, and they're doing great. So,
That's awesome.
Yeah, you never give up hope. And the fact of the matter is, even if your spouse isn't interested in trying to work on the marriage, there's a lot you can do to bring healing to your spouse and to bring healing to you as well. But sometimes you need, a professional that can help you navigate some of those waters, because we don't plan for that, right? People don't go into marriages planning for what their divorce is going to look like. Thank goodness. But
absolutely,
you need help sometimes. So, and I think oftentimes, I guess in all marriages, but I see it, I think even more so in Catholic marriages, where one spouse wants to work on it and the other says, no, I'm done. And they file for divorce. So you've kind of got I don't know what the right word is, but a perpetrator, and you got a victim. I know that's the right word. Sometimes you've got a victim in this thing. And then someone who says, I really don't care. I'm moving on and doing my own thing. Talk about that scenario, and what words do you have to offer for the victim in that?
Well, I think, first of all, I would say that in every marriage, both spouses have some responsibility. And and sometimes it is quite imbalanced, as you said, but there's a lot that has taken place before the marriage that comes in and influences it. And I would say we have, as a spouse, we have 50% of the control, and we also have some influence on the other, for good or for ill. Yeah. And so if your spouse has filed, don't give up spiritually. Don't say, well, there's nothing I can do. The important thing is to continue to act with virtue and charity And if you feel that that your spouse is wrong in terms of that they should not be divorcing, or maybe they're unfaithful, that we have a responsibility to exhort or to speak the truth in love and to try to call them back into accountability.
Yeah.
Because we have great spiritual influence. We are one flesh, and we have that influence and grace on our side. I have a friend whose husband was unfaithful, and she went to a couple of priests, and they said, I think you could get an annulment. And she decided to stay and pray.
Yeah.
And after a couple of years, he came back to her, but she stood the course. She was persevering, and she prayed for him. And this was 25 years ago.
Oh, my.
And they have children. They have 4 children. They have grandchildren. And if she hadn't exhibited that heroic virtue and just stayed, their whole family would have fallen apart. And of course, you and I know that any divorce not only affects the two, but it affects the children, the grandchildren, the grandchildren.
Well, exactly. And that whole idea about somehow if I can, quote unquote, get an annulment, that makes it all okay.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. I mean, the only thing the annulment does, and that's how I look at it, the only thing the annulment does is say, oh, you can get married again if you want to. Doesn't remove the pain, the stress, the heartache. It doesn't remove the trauma from the children. It doesn't do anything to heal the emotional wounds that are devastating for everybody.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times if we're in a painful situation, the thing we want most is to get away from the pain. And so we think if I get away from him or her, it's going to reduce my pain, and that will be a solution. Yeah. And I can get an annulment, and then I can find somebody right for me and be happy. Well, we know that second marriages, the divorce rate is something like 75%. Yeah. And third marriages, it's like 87%. So it really, the thinking of, oh, this is my solution, is we can be jumping from the frying pan into the fire, because both parties have some responsibility, and sometimes it's through omission. Like, for example, if one of the spouses tends to be abusive, the other spouse sometimes allows it and doesn't have the tools to be able to protect and say, I heard you say, Doug, just a couple days ago on your show, you said, if somebody's abusive, you say, I want to talk to you about this. And as soon as you can be civil, I'll be back, and I'll be happy to discuss it with you then. And you leave the room. Yeah. Sometimes we need to leave the room rather than leave the marriage later. So there's all kinds of different things that come into play here.
Yeah, for sure. This entire episode of Marriage Unhindered is on the updated Relevant Radio app. The Relevant Radio app is completely free and updated daily with fresh articles, podcasts, and prayers.